Don't sign that paper, Mommy. The little girl's hand grabbed the contract seconds before Elena Bellini's trembling fingers touched Rocco Valenti's gold fountain pen. The room went silent as Sophia held the dark blue document against her chest. Victor Moretti smiled politely and reached for it, saying she misunderstood. But Rocco noticed one thing. His trusted lawyer was not looking at the contract anymore. He was looking at the child. 3 hours earlier, the Valenti mansion had been preparing for what everyone called a simple formality. The glass walls of the living room reflected the afternoon light. The marble floor shone beneath expensive shoes, and a quiet feeling of control filled the house. Rocco Valenti sat at the head of the room, his black suit perfectly pressed, his father's gold watch resting beneath his cuff. Around him stood people who had spent years protecting his empire. His lawyer, his family, his employees. Everyone knew their place, except Sofia Bellini, the 9-year-old daughter of the woman who cleaned the rooms where powerful people made decisions. Elena stood near the table holding a small folder with both hands. She looked uncomfortable, but she trusted the people around her. Victor Moretti had told her this was only paperwork connected to her position as a longtime household employee. A final acknowledgement. Nothing more. "You have worked for this family for years, Elena," Victor said warmly. "This is simply to make everything official." His voice was calm, professional, almost kind. That was what made him dangerous. He never sounded like a man taking something. He sounded like a man helping. Sophia stood near her mother, quietly watching the room the way she always did. She noticed things adults ignored. The way Victor kept one hand on the last page of the contract. The way he turned the folder slightly so Elena could not see the bottom section clearly. The way everyone was telling her not to worry before she had even asked a question. Sophia looked at the paper again. She could not understand every legal word. She was 9 years old, but she knew something about papers. Her mother read every bill twice, every school notice, every letter, because mistakes cost people like them more than they cost people like the ones sitting around that table. "Mom," Sophia whispered. Elena looked down. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sophia pointed at the bottom corner of the page. "Why does a resignation paper have company words on it?" The room changed. It was not dramatic. No one shouted. No one moved quickly. But Rocco noticed the silence that followed. Victor reached for the contract with a small smile. "Sophia, these are adult documents." He said it gently, like he was protecting her from something complicated. But Sophia did not move. She held the paper tighter. "I know I'm not an adult," she said quietly. "But I know Mommy doesn't sign things people tell her not to read." Elena looked embarrassed. "Sophia, enough." She did not want trouble. People like her did not create trouble inside houses like this. They survived by staying invisible. Rocco watched his employee and her daughter carefully. For years, he had judged loyalty by silence. The people around him were paid to obey. Sophia was the first person in that room who had nothing to gain from interrupting. Victor finally laughed softly. "Mr. Valenti, I apologize. The child is confused. Let me handle this." That sentence made Rocco's eyes narrow. Not because Sophia had accused him. Not because Victor had defended himself. Because Victor had answered too quickly. Rocco slowly reached across the table and placed his hand over the contract before Victor could take it. "No," he said. "Let her finish." Sophia looked at the page again. Her small finger moved toward a line near the bottom that almost disappeared into the shadow of the paper fold. "I don't know what this word means," she admitted. "But I know it is not the same as what you told Mommy." For the first time that afternoon, Victor Moretti stopped smiling. And when Rocco pulled the page closer, he saw the tiny phrase hidden beneath Elena's supposed resignation form. Transfer of controlling interest. Transfer of controlling interest. The words stayed on the page like a stain that refused to disappear. Rocco Valenti read them once. Then again. He did not move. He did not raise his voice. In his world, silence was often more dangerous than anger. Victor Moretti noticed the change immediately. The lawyer's polite expression remained in place, but his fingers tightened slightly around the edge of his jacket. "Mr. Valenti, That is a legal phrase taken out of context, Victor said calmly. There is nothing unusual here. Rocco lifted his eyes from the paper. I didn't ask if it was unusual. His voice was low. I asked why Elena was told this was a simple formality. No one answered. Elena stood beside Sophia, looking between the contract and the faces around her. She looked smaller than she had a few minutes earlier. Not because of fear, because she was realizing everyone in the room had known more than she did. Sophia noticed her mother's hands shaking and quietly reached for them. She did not understand the world of corporate ownership or family power. But she understood when someone was being pushed into a corner. Victor stepped forward carefully. Elena, you know how these things work. There are always technical words in documents. That does not mean there is a problem. It sounded reasonable, almost comforting. That was exactly why it worked. People trusted calm voices. They trusted expensive suits. They trusted people who knew which words to use. Rocco looked down at the contract again. He noticed something he had missed before. The first pages were clean, organized, professional. But the final page was different. The spacing was slightly uneven. The paper color was not exactly the same. A small detail, the kind most people would never notice. The kind Rocco had built an empire by noticing. Who printed this? He asked. Victor answered immediately. My office prepared it. Too quickly. Rocco said nothing. He simply placed the document flat on the table and watched the room. Sophia looked at Victor, then at the paper. That man in your office, she said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. What man? Victor asked. Sophia hesitated. She looked at her mother first. She was not trying to accuse anyone. She was trying to remember correctly. The man who brought the papers yesterday. He had a different folder. Victor's eyes moved for less than a second. But Rocco saw it. Sophia saw it too. Different how? Rocco asked. Sophia walked to the edge of the table but did not touch the contract. This folder has a scratch on the corner. She pointed. The one yesterday didn't. Victor smiled faintly. Children remember strange things. Sophia lowered her eyes for a moment. The room was full of people who could make her mother lose her job. She was scared, but she did not change her answer. Maybe, she whispered, but I remember because Mommy told me not to touch anything. So I only looked. Rocco leaned back slowly. That sentence stayed with him. She had not been searching. She had not been spying. She had simply been there, watching, waiting, remembering. He picked up his phone beneath the table and sent a single message to his head of security. Check yesterday's office access. Do not alert anyone. A few minutes passed. The room returned to its carefully controlled rhythm. Victor explained clauses. Elena apologized again. Rocco listened without reacting. But he was no longer listening to the words. He was listening for what people avoided saying. Sophia stood quietly near her mother, holding her small notebook against her chest. Rocco noticed it. What is that? He asked. Sophia looked down. Nothing. Elena answered quickly. It's just her little notebook. A notebook about what? Rocco asked. Sophia hesitated. Then she opened it slightly. Inside were small handwriting marks, dates, times, simple notes written by a child. Things I notice, she said. Victor gave a quiet laugh. Mr. Valenti, surely we are not going to investigate a child's diary. Rocco looked at him. You seem very interested in making sure I don't. The smile disappeared for half a second. That was enough. Later, when Rocco reviewed the security report alone in his office, one detail appeared on the screen. Yesterday's visitor log showed Victor Moretti entering the private legal room at 4:12 p.m. But the official file creation time on Elena's contract was 3:47 p.m. The document existed before the lawyer who supposedly created it had even entered the room. The document existed before the lawyer who claimed to create it had even entered the room. Rocco Valenti stared at the security report on his phone, the glow from the screen reflecting against the dark wood of his office. For a man who had spent decades finding lies hidden beneath layers of loyalty, the numbers were small. almost meaningless. A timestamp, a few minutes, a simple mistake. But small mistakes were how powerful people lost everything. He looked back at the living room through the open doorway. Sofia Bellini was still standing beside her mother, holding her little notebook against her chest. She did not know what she had uncovered. She only knew something about that paper felt wrong. Rocco walked back into the room without changing his expression. Victor Moretti looked up immediately. "Everything all right, Mr. Valenti?" he asked. Too smoothly. Rocco placed his phone face down on the table. "Who prepared Elena's documents?" Victor did not hesitate. "My office." "Which person?" Victor adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. "My assistant handled the formatting. I reviewed everything personally." Rocco watched him carefully. "Personally?" "Of course." Victor smiled. "I would never allow an error involving your family." The words sounded loyal. They were supposed to sound loyal. But Rocco noticed something else. Victor's eyes moved toward the folder for less than a second. Not toward Elena. Not toward him. Toward the contract. Sofia saw it too. She quietly opened her notebook. "Mr. Valenti," she said. Rocco looked at her. "Yes." Sofia swallowed. She was aware of every adult watching her. She knew she was standing in a room where one wrong sentence could hurt her mother. "Can I show you something?" Rocco nodded once. Sofia walked closer and carefully opened the notebook. Inside were small notes written in uneven handwriting. Not secrets. Not accusations. Just observations. Dates. Times. Things that did not make sense to a child who was simply paying attention. "Tuesday," Sofia said softly, pointing to one line. "Mr. Moretti came to the house at 4:12. Victor's expression changed slightly. "And?" he asked. Sofia continued. "But the printer receipt on the machine said the papers were printed at 3:47. The room became quieter. Elena looked confused. "Sofia, honey, how do you know that?" Sofia looked down. "Because the printer made a loud noise. I was helping Mrs. Collins fold towels in the hallway. I remember because she told me the printer was broken again." Rocco turned toward the hallway. The household staff member was not there. But the memory was clear. A child had no reason to manipulate a timeline. Victor gave a small laugh. "Mr. Valenti, we are seriously discussing a printer receipt from a child?" His tone remained polite, but the warmth disappeared. Rocco looked back at him. "No." He picked up the contract. "We are discussing why your timeline is wrong." Victor opened his mouth, then paused. Just for a moment. He recovered quickly. "There may have been a draft printed earlier." Rocco held his gaze. "Then why didn't you mention that before?" Silence. Victor reached for the contract again. "Because this is becoming unnecessarily complicated." His hand stopped halfway. Rocco noticed. The lawyer who always controlled every conversation was now trying to end one. Sofia looked at the document one more time. "There is something else," she said. Elena immediately shook her head. "Sofia, that's enough." The little girl looked at her mother. Fear was visible in Elena's eyes. Not fear of Sofia. Fear of what powerful people could do when someone challenged them. Sofia lowered her voice. "I don't want trouble. I just don't want Mommy to sign something she doesn't understand." Rocco heard the sentence differently. Not as a child's fear. As a statement of loyalty. He looked at Elena, then at Victor. For 20 years, people had brought him reports, contracts, and promises. Yet the first person to point out something wrong had been a child standing quietly near the wall. Rocco reached for the contract again and examined the final page. This time he looked closer at the seal. The red Valenti mark appeared perfect at first glance. But beneath the edge of the wax impression, there was a tiny break in the pattern. A detail almost impossible to notice. Almost. Rocco touched the damaged seal with his thumb. Victor's face remained calm, but his hand slowly moved toward his phone. And that was when Rocco knew the broken seal was not the first mistake. It was the first one Victor had failed to hide. The broken seal was not the first mistake. It was the first one Victor had failed to hide. Rocco Valenti kept his thumb resting on the damaged edge of the red wax impression. Around him, the room waited. No one spoke because everyone understood something had shifted. The contract was still sitting on the table. The same paper, the same signatures, the same expensive folder. But now Rocco was looking at it differently. Victor noticed. "Mr. Valenti," he said calmly, "if there is a concern, we can simply replace the document and prepare a cleaner copy." It was a reasonable suggestion. Almost too reasonable. Rocco lifted his eyes.
No.
His voice was quiet. "I want this one." Victor paused. Only for a second. But Sophia saw it. She always noticed the moments adults tried to hide. Rocco placed the contract back on the table. "Bring me the original file." Victor gave a small nod. "Of course." He turned toward his assistant, a young man waiting near the doorway with a leather folder. "Please retrieve the archived copy from my office." The assistant nodded and walked away. Everything looked normal, professional, controlled. That was how people like Victor survived. They never appeared afraid. They simply adjusted the room until everyone else doubted themselves. Sophia remained beside Elena. Her fingers held the edge of her notebook tightly. The house suddenly felt larger than before. The marble floors, the tall windows, the quiet security guards standing near the entrance. Every person in that room had a title. Sophia only had a small notebook and a memory of something that did not make sense. One of Rocco's senior advisors, a man who had worked with the family for years, glanced at Sophia. "Perhaps the child should wait outside while we handle this." His tone was not cruel. That was what made it worse. He sounded practical. "This conversation involves legal matters." Sophia lowered her eyes, but she did not move. Elena immediately stepped forward.
"I'm sorry."
Sophia didn't mean to interrupt. Before she could reach for her daughter's hand, Rocco spoke. "She stays." The room went quiet again. He did not say it kindly. He said it like a decision. Sophia looked at him. Rocco looked back at the contract. "If someone noticed a problem before my legal team did, I want to know why." The advisor nodded slowly, accepting the answer. But Sophia still felt the pressure of the room. She was not being attacked. She was being erased politely. Victor returned a few minutes later holding a new folder. "The original archive," he said. "Everything is in order." He placed it on the table. Rocco did not open it immediately. "Your office door," he said. Victor looked up. "Excuse me? Was it locked yesterday?" Tiny pause. "Yes." Rocco watched his face. "Who had access?" Victor smiled slightly. "Only authorized staff." "Names?" Victor listed them. Calmly, easily. But when he mentioned his assistant, his eyes moved toward the doorway. Just briefly. Sophia noticed the same thing she had noticed earlier. "Mr. Valenti," she said softly. Everyone looked at her again. The man who brought the papers yesterday wasn't the same man who brought them today. Victor sighed. Not angrily, almost sadly. "Sophia, sometimes memories are not perfect." She looked down at her notebook. "I know." Her voice was small, but steady. "That's why I wrote the time." Rocco looked at the page. A child's handwriting. A simple note. For 12. Visitor brought blue folder. Different shoes. Sophia had written it because she thought it was strange. Not because she knew what it meant. Rocco turned to the security guard by the door. "Check the office access log." The guard immediately took out his tablet. Victor remained composed. "Mr. Valenti, I assure you there is no need to involve security over a misunderstanding." Rocco did not answer. The guard looked at the screen. Then his expression changed slightly. "Sir." Rocco turned. "What?" The guard swallowed. "The archive room was accessed yesterday at 4:12 p.m. Victor relaxed slightly, almost imperceptibly. Then the guard continued. "But the access card used was not registered to Mr. Moretti or his assistant." The room froze. Victor's hand stopped halfway toward his phone. And for the first time, the man who had controlled every conversation in the mansion looked at Sophia's. little notebook as if it had become something far more dangerous than a child's scribbles. The access card used was not registered to Mr. Moretti or his assistant. The words remained in the air long after the security guard stopped speaking. Victor Moretti did not move. Not immediately. That was what caught Rocco Valenti's attention. A man who had spent 20 years inside courtrooms and family meetings knew how to react.
Surprise.
Confusion. Anger. Victor showed none of them. He simply looked at the tablet, then at the contract folder, as if calculating what part of the truth was still safe to reveal. Rocco noticed. Sophia noticed too. The little girl slowly closed her notebook and held it against her chest. What happens now?
Elena whispered.
Rocco did not answer right away. He looked at the security guard. Save that record. Make 3 copies. Send one directly to my private attorney. The guard nodded. Yes, sir. Victor gave a small, almost disappointed smile. Rocco, this is becoming unnecessary. An access error does not prove anything. Rocco turned toward him. I didn't say it did. He paused. I said it needs to be preserved. That was the difference. He was no longer reacting. He was building a case. The room changed after that. The contract was no longer just a document on a table. It was evidence. The assistant was asked to remain nearby. The folder was photographed. The pages were counted. Every movement was recorded. Sophia watched quietly as adults who normally controlled everything suddenly started treating a piece of paper like it could hurt them. Then she reached into her small backpack. Elena looked surprised. Sophia, what are you doing? Sophia did not answer immediately. She carefully pulled out a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Not the contract. Something older. Something smaller. I found this yesterday, she said. I didn't know if it mattered. Rocco looked at it. Why didn't you show me before? Sophia looked down. Because everyone kept saying I was wrong. That answer stayed with him. Not because it was emotional. Because it was true. Rocco took the sleeve but did not open it. Where did you get this? Near. The printer room. Sophia pointed toward the hallway. It was under the trash bin. Victor's expression changed. Very slightly. His eyes moved toward the sleeve. Rocco saw it. He saw everything now. Open it, he said. The paper inside was a discarded printout. Partial page. Most of the text was faded. But one section remained visible. A document code. A revision number. And a date. Rocco looked at the date first. Then the revision number. His face stayed calm, but something behind his eyes shifted. This revision was created before the final contract, he said quietly. Victor immediately responded. A draft. Nothing more. Rocco looked at him. Maybe. He turned the page over. But why was a draft with a different revision number destroyed? No one answered. Sophia stepped closer. The printer made that sound again today, she said. The same sound as yesterday. Rocco looked at her. What sound? She thought for a moment. Like someone printed something and then stopped the machine before it finished. A small detail. Almost meaningless. But Rocco had learned his entire life that criminals rarely made mistakes in the obvious places. They made them in the moments they thought nobody was watching. He called his private attorney. I need a forensic copy of every device connected to Victor Moretti's office. Today. Victor's face hardened for the first time. Rocco, you are making an accusation based on a child's observations. Rocco looked at him.
No.
His voice was cold. I am investigating based on evidence. The contract, the access log, the discarded revision page. 3 separate pieces that now pointed in the same direction. Still, Rocco did not accuse Victor. Not yet. 20 years of loyalty could not be destroyed by suspicion alone. But as he looked down at the discarded page, he noticed one final detail. In the bottom corner was a faint handwritten mark. Not Sophia's handwriting. Not Elena's. A single initial written by the person who had approved the revision. Rocco knew that handwriting. He had seen it on thousands of legal documents. And for the first time, he wondered if the man standing across from him had been protecting the Valenti family all these years, or preparing to take it from them. Rocco knew that handwriting. He had seen it on thousands of legal documents. And for the first time, he wondered if the man standing across from him had been protecting the Valenti family all these years, or preparing to take it from them. The thought followed him long after the living room emptied. The contract was locked away. The copies were secured. The discarded revision page sat inside an evidence envelope on his desk, untouched. But Rocco Valenti had learned something over decades of surviving dangerous people. The first betrayal was rarely the crime. The first betrayal was the moment someone convinced you they were still on your side. Rain tapped quietly against the windows of his private study that night. The mansion was unusually still. Somewhere downstairs, a television played softly in the kitchen. A spoon touched the side of a glass. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. The kind of sounds that made people believe everything was safe. Rocco sat alone beneath the warm light of his desk lamp, staring at the handwritten initial on the old revision page. Victor Moretti, not just his lawyer, his family's lawyer. The man who had reviewed every contract, every acquisition, every protection agreement for 20 years. Rocco picked up his phone. "I need the Valenti Holdings archives from 5 years ago," he said. "Every ownership change, every legal revision, every document Victor touched." He paused. "Do it quietly." The person on the other end understood immediately. No questions. No unnecessary movement. Rocco did not need noise. Noise warned people. Silence revealed them. The next morning, the first report arrived. At first glance, everything looked normal. But then his new attorney placed 3 files on the desk. "These companies were restructured through the same legal process," she said. "Different names, different years, same pattern." Rocco opened the first file. A smaller company, a different owner, a transfer agreement. A controlling interest moved away from the original family members. He opened the second. The same structure, the same type of language, the same legal loopholes. He looked at the third file. The same signature approval. Victor Moretti. "How long?" Rocco asked. His attorney looked down. "At least 6 years." Rocco said nothing. 6 years. 6 years of meetings. 6 years of trusting the man sitting closest to his power. 6 years of believing every warning came from outside his walls. Sophia found him later in the kitchen. Not because she was searching for him. She was bringing her mother a cup of tea. She stopped when she saw the files on the table. "Did Mommy do something wrong?" she asked quietly. Rocco looked up. The question surprised him. Not because it was childish, because it showed what Sophia feared most. That the powerful people in the room would blame the person with the least power. "No," Rocco said. "Your mother did nothing wrong." Sophia nodded slowly. She held the cup carefully with both hands. "Then why are they making her sign things?" Rocco looked at her for a moment. He could have given a complicated answer. A legal answer. A mafia answer. Instead, he said the truth. Because some people think quiet people are easier to control. Sophia looked down at the tea. "My mom is quiet because she is kind," she said. "Not because she is weak." The words stayed with him. Later that afternoon, Rocco reviewed the security footage from the night before. He watched Victor enter the private legal room. He watched him leave 23 minutes later. Nothing unusual. Nothing obvious. Then the footage skipped. 7 minutes missing. Exactly 7 minutes. Rocco leaned closer to the screen. "Who removed this?" he asked. The security director looked uncomfortable. "We don't know yet." Rocco looked back at the empty timeline. A missing moment. A missing page. A missing truth. The pattern was no longer a mistake. It was a method. Then another file appeared. A bank transfer record connected to one of the old companies. The payment description was simple. Legal consulting. The receiver was hidden behind another company name. But the approval signature was clear. Victor Moretti. Rocco closed his eyes for a moment. Not from anger. From realization. The most dangerous person in his world had not been the man standing outside the gates. It had been the man who knew exactly how to walk through them, and the person who first saw the danger had been the one person Rocco had spent years overlooking. The most dangerous person in his world had not been the man standing outside the gates. It had been the man who knew exactly how to walk through them, and the person who first saw the danger had been the one person Rocco had spent years overlooking. Rocco Valenti sat in his office long after midnight, the security footage frozen on the missing 7-minute gap. The screen showed nothing, no movement,
No explanation.
just a blank space where the truth should have been. For most people, an empty space meant nothing. For Rocco, it meant someone had made a decision. Someone had chosen what he was allowed to see. The next morning, Rocco changed nothing. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Victor Moretti arrived at the mansion expecting tension. Instead, he found the same quiet halls, the same guards, the same routine. Rocco greeted him with the same controlled expression he had worn for years. "Good morning, Victor." Nothing more.
No accusation. No anger.
No warning. Victor relaxed slightly. A mistake. A very small one. But Rocco saw it. He had spent his life studying people who believed they were safe. "The revised documents are ready," Victor said, placing a new folder on the desk. "As I explained, the previous copy only contained administrative errors." Rocco looked at the folder. He did not open it. "Interesting." Victor waited. "What is?" Rocco asked. "You called it an error before anyone confirmed there was one." The room became quiet. Victor smiled. "Because I know my work." Rocco nodded slowly. "Of course you do." That was all he said. But the conversation was already over. Later that afternoon, Rocco created a test. A simple one. He asked his assistant to prepare a false update to the contract. Nothing dangerous. Nothing real. Just a single sentence changed on one page. The fake document was placed inside a sealed folder and stored in the private legal room. Only 3 people knew it existed. Rocco, his new attorney, and Victor. Sophia was not involved. She was not asked to investigate. Rocco had learned enough to understand that a child should not carry the weight of adult battles. But he also knew something important. Sophia noticed what adults ignored. That evening, she sat in the kitchen with Elena, finishing her homework while the sound of rain tapped against the windows. The old clock above the refrigerator clicked with every second. Sophia looked up suddenly. "Mom!"
Elena smiled softly.
"What? Do you remember yesterday?" Mr. Moretti said he left before the rain started. Elena thought for a moment. "Yes." Sophia looked at the clock. "But yesterday the power went out at 6:18. The kitchen clock stopped. I remember because I had to finish my homework with a flashlight." Elena frowned slightly. "Why does that matter?" Sophia closed her notebook. "Because Mr. Moretti told Mr. Valenti he signed the papers at 6:30. The small detail sat between them. Not a crime. Not proof. Just a crack." Rocco heard the conversation from the hallway. He did not interrupt. He simply remembered. The next morning, Victor entered the legal room with confidence. The sealed folder was already on the desk. The camera above the door blinked once. Recording. Victor opened the folder. He read the changed sentence. His expression barely moved. But his phone vibrated immediately afterward. He reached for it, then stopped. Someone was watching. Someone wanted to see what he would do. He closed the folder. "Everything looks correct," he said. Rocco stood near the window looking outside. "You are certain?" "Absolutely." Rocco turned around. "Even the ownership clause?" Victor answered instantly. "Yes." Pause followed. Too fast. Too specific. Rocco said nothing. He simply took the folder back and placed it beside the original contract. Victor left the room believing he had survived another question. But he did not know the trap was never the document. The trap was the answer he gave. Minutes later, Rocco received the security report. The camera had captured Victor opening the folder. It had captured his eyes moving directly to the altered sentence. The same sentence that did not exist in the original version. Rocco stared at the footage. Sophia had been right from the beginning. People did not reveal themselves when they were accused. They revealed themselves when they believed they were correcting a mistake. And when Victor saw the security file waiting on Rocco's desk, he finally understood something that made his expression change for the first time. The little girl was no longer standing alone in that room. She had given Rocco the one thing Victor feared most, a reason to look closer. The little girl was no longer standing alone in that room. She had given Rocco the one thing Victor feared most, a reason to look closer. The family conference room inside the Valenti mansion had never felt so quiet. It was the same room where powerful men had made decisions for decades. The same table where deals were signed, alliances were formed, and people who had less power learned when to stay silent. This time, Victor Moretti sat at that table believing he still controlled the room. Rocco sat across from him, expression unreadable. Between them were 3 items placed carefully on the polished wood: the original contract, the security footage report, and the sealed evidence file containing the altered document. Victor looked at them and smiled faintly. "I assume this is about the misunderstanding we discussed." Rocco did not answer. He looked toward the screen at the end of the room. "Play it." The lights dimmed. The first video appeared. The security footage from the legal room. Victor walking in. Victor opening the folder. Victor reading the altered clause. Victor recognizing a sentence that was never supposed to exist. Then the screen froze. The room stayed silent. Victor leaned back slightly. "That proves nothing." Rocco still said nothing. The second piece of evidence appeared. The original contract. The revised contract. Side by side. The changed ownership clause highlighted. The missing page restored. The false revision number exposed. Then the audio recording played. It was not a dramatic confession. It was something much worse. A calm conversation recorded days earlier between Victor and the assistant. Once Valenti signs, access transfers immediately. After that, he can no longer reverse the process without legal approval. Victor's own voice filled the room. Quiet, confident, certain. Elena covered her mouth. She looked down at the table where she had almost placed her signature. Sophia stood beside her, holding her mother's hand. Rocco did not move, not for several seconds. The man who had faced enemies with guns, threats, and betrayal sat completely still. Because this was different. This happened inside his home, under his name, through the hands of someone he trusted. Victor finally leaned forward. "That recording is manipulated." Rocco looked at him. "No." His voice was calm. "Your mistake was believing the only people worth listening to were people like you." Victor's eyes moved toward Sophia. For the first time, he looked at her differently. Not like a child. Not like an inconvenience. Like the person who had started the collapse of his entire plan. Sophia did not look proud. She did not look victorious. She only looked at Rocco and said quietly, "I just didn't want my mom to lose something she worked for." The sentence hit harder than any accusation. Rocco looked at Elena, the woman who had cleaned his home for years. The woman who had been standing near his decisions but never included in them. He remembered every time he walked past without asking if she was okay. Every time he assumed silence meant agreement. Every time he believed loyalty only came from people with titles. His hand moved toward the gold fountain pen sitting near the evidence folder. The same pen Victor had placed in front of Elena. The same pen meant to finalize the betrayal. He picked it up slowly. Victor watched him. "Rocco, think carefully. You cannot destroy 20 years of trust over this." Rocco looked at the contract one last time. 20 years of trust? He repeated softly. "No, Victor." He placed the pen down. 20 years of me not looking closely enough. Nobody spoke. The room that once made Elena feel invisible now held every piece of evidence that proved she had been telling the truth without saying a word. Rocco stood. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply gathered the documents into one folder and closed it. Victor understood before anyone else did. The investigation was no longer about suspicion. It was about consequences. Rocco looked at his attorney waiting near the door. Then he turned back toward Victor. Preserve every file. Freeze every account connected to these documents. Pause. And call my attorney. And call my attorney. Those 4 words changed everything. Not because they were loud. Not because they carried a threat. But because everyone in the room understood what came next. Rocco Valenti was no longer trying to discover the truth. He was protecting it. In the days that followed, the Valenti family moved differently. Quietly, carefully. The way powerful organizations moved when they understood that the greatest danger was not an enemy outside the walls, but a failure inside them. Every piece of evidence was preserved. The original contract was sealed. The altered revisions were archived. The security footage showing the missing 7 minutes and Victor opening the false document was copied through proper legal channels. The audio recording was verified by independent specialists.
No rumors. No revenge.
Just facts. Victor Moretti, the man who had spent 20 years presenting himself as the protector of the Valenti family, was removed from all legal positions immediately. His access to company records was frozen. His accounts connected to the fraudulent transfers were placed under investigation. The board of Valenti Holdings reviewed every transaction connected to the scheme. The companies he had quietly targeted were protected before ownership could change hands. The man who believed paperwork could erase people discovered that paperwork could also expose him. The most difficult conversation was not with Victor. It was with Elena Bellini. She stood in Rocco's office several days later, holding the same contract folder that had almost taken away everything she had worked for. "I never wanted trouble," she said quietly. Rocco looked at her. "I know. I just wanted to keep my job." That sentence stayed with him. Because for years, Elena had not asked for power. She had not asked for a place at the table. She had simply asked to be treated honestly. Rocco placed the contract on his desk. The same dark blue folder. The same document that had started everything. But now it carried a different meaning. "You should have never been put in that position," he said. Elena looked surprised. Powerful people rarely apologized to people they considered beneath them. "I should have asked questions sooner," Rocco continued. "I should have listened before someone had to prove they were worth listening to." He did not offer her a bag of money and call the problem solved. Instead, he rebuilt the system that had allowed Victor to target her. Elena received a new employment agreement reviewed by an independent attorney. Her position, salary, benefits, and protections were written clearly.
No hidden clauses.
No confusing language. Every household employee under the Valenti organization received the same protection. Every contract was reviewed by someone outside the family. Every worker had a voice. Because Rocco finally understood that loyalty could not exist where people were afraid to speak. Sophia watched all of it quietly. She never asked for anything expensive. Not a mansion room. Not jewelry. Not a reward. One evening, Rocco found her sitting at the kitchen table with her notebook open. "Are you writing down something else?" he asked. Sophia looked up.
No.
She closed the notebook. "I'm just trying to remember that people should listen before things become serious." Rocco sat across from her. For a moment, the most feared man in the city had nothing to say. Later that night, the old contract was placed inside a glass case in Rocco's private office. Not as a trophy, not as a reminder of victory, as a reminder of failure. The broken seal was still visible. The altered page was still there. A record of the moment power almost ignored the truth. On the first day of the new year, the Valenti mansion felt different. Not quieter because people were afraid. Quieter because people felt safe. Elena sat at the kitchen table with Sophia, sharing breakfast before school. A warm cup of milk sat beside Sophia's notebook. Her new coat hung by the door. Her name was written clearly on her school bag. No one called her the maid's daughter anymore. Rocco passed the doorway and stopped. Sophia looked up at him. "Mr. Valenti?" "Yes," she asked. "Are you still going to listen when people are small?" Rocco looked at the little girl who had changed the course of his family without ever trying to become powerful. "Yes," he said, "especially then. And in a world where power had always belonged to the loudest voices, The truth finally belonged to the person everyone had ignored.